Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, December 9th, 2025. All right, so today we're starting with some exciting news, something that's pretty cool. December 9th, 2025 marks the 30th birthday of antiwar.com. That's how long the site has been around. It's only 5 years younger than me. And for those who don't know, it was founded in 1995 by my boss, Eric Garris, who still runs the site today, and his best friend, Justin Raimondo, who we lost back in 2019. And if anybody is familiar with Justin's work, you know how great of a writer he was. He was the voice of antiwar.com, the main columnist. And antiwar.com really started to get big around the time that NATO started bombing Yugoslavia. And then, of course, in the post 9/11 era, they got a lot of attention for opposing the march toward war with Iraq. And antiwar.com has always published columns from people across the political spectrum. It's a single issue project, and it's, become a news site, become what it is today. And it's a very valuable asset for the anti-war movement. Dan McAdams, who works for Ron Paul still today, but he also worked for him when he was in Congress. I think it was him who has said this before. They used to print out antiwar.com articles for Ron Paul to read every day. It was kind of like his daily briefing. And McAdams has said it's kind of like the intelligence wing of the anti-war movement. And, we produce, this daily content to keep track of the wars and interventions and kind of give people the tools to oppose them. For regular antiwar.com readers, people who follow us or people who listen to this show, they're much more informed about these conflicts than, your average American, obviously, but also, they really know more about it than the people in Congress who are pushing for these wars. They don't really know the first thing about these conflicts. They're just doing what they're paid to do, essentially. I do believe we are a very valuable resource, and a lot of big name people, big shows, use us all the time, are always using our content. So on the 30th anniversary of antiwar.com, we are asking for people to make an end of the year donation. We're a nonprofit, so it's tax deductible. You'll be able to write it off for your taxes for this year. And we are entirely reader funded. None of us take big salaries. I can assure you of that. This is a passion project for all of us. So go to antiwar.com/donate. And please help us out, whatever you can spare. I'll bug you about this a few times before the year ends. But also, we have a cool piece from the Orange County Register, which is a great paper that also opposed the war in Iraq, about the 30th anniversary of antiwar.com. And they did an interview with Eric. It's written by John Seller, who's a longtime reader and fan of antiwar.com. So definitely go give that a read. And pitch in if you can. All right, so now we are going to start with the news, and you're going to see what we're up against, what kind of money we're up against here. So the NDAA that Congress has released will give President Trump his $1 trillion military budget. So Congress has released its 2026 National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA. I've seen many people point out, now that we got the U.S. War Department instead of the Defense Department, this should really be called the National War Authorization Act. But anyway, so they released this Sunday, and they're preparing to pass it. They're going to hold a vote soon. And this NDAA is going to give Trump his $1 trillion military budget. The actual cost of this NDAA is $901 billion. So the way that the Trump administration has gotten its $1 trillion budget do you remember what they called the big, beautiful bill earlier this year, that huge, massive spending bill that was passed by Congress? That included a $156 billion, what they call a supplemental military spending bill. So that $150 billion or so, most of it, the majority of it, is going toward the 2026 military budget. So you add that $150 billion to the $901 billion NDAA, and you get well over $1 trillion. And this is unprecedented. This was in the White House request and the Pentagon request. They took into account this supplemental. So Trump requested $1 trillion military budget. This is something that's not really getting reported properly anywhere. So, this is, again, unprecedented spending. The reality is that, total U.S. military costs have exceeded $1 trillion each year for many years. When you factor in, the other agencies that aren't included in here, the interest on the debt accrued from national security spending, veteran care, which is a huge cost. And so, we've been over $1 trillion, but we've never had this official $1 trillion military budget. But it is here now, and Trump has brought it. I don't know if you remember in the beginning of his administration, he was talking about making some kind of deal with Russia and China about cutting military spending, but obviously that was not a serious plan because this is what he really wanted was this giant budget. And Pete Hegseth over the weekend suggested that they might even get more money for this mammoth budget. This is a speech he gave at the Reagan National Defense Forum. He said, quote, "We received a historic boost in funding last year and believe that it is only just the beginning. We need a revived defense industrial base. We need those capabilities. We need them yesterday. And so resource-wise, I think this room will be encouraged by what we'll see soon, but I don't want to get too ahead," end quote. So suggesting that they might even increase it more. So House Speaker Mike Johnson is expected to bring the NDAA to the floor for a vote on Wednesday afternoon. Then it would go to the Senate and then Trump's desk. So this is what they call the reconciled version, the version of the NDAA that was negotiated between the House and the Senate. And they actually added $8 billion to it from what President Trump requested. Trump requested $892 billion plus the $150 billion supplemental to get to over $1 trillion. And the House and Senate added an extra $8 billion into the mix. So again, you see what we're up against here at antiwar.com. At least one House Republican will vote against the NDAA, which is Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. She said she objected due to the foreign aid that's rolled into the bill. And we're going to get into this in another story, but, well, actually, no, not all of these. So the NDAA, it's over 3,000 pages. It's huge. And they stick all these amendments into it. And sometimes good amendments get introduced, like efforts to cut aid or bring troops home from a certain conflict. But they pretty much always, the good amendments get cut out and the bad amendments get stuck in. So some amendments that have been included, which is an effort to block Trump's drawdowns of troops from Europe and South Korea, these amendments set a certain limit and basically say, a president cannot bring troops down to these levels, below this level, without approval from Congress or like some kind of review. So they're trying to block troop drawdowns in Europe. And also there's a provision to protect Israel, of course, from global arms restrictions. We'll get into that in the next story. And there's also an amendment to lift the Caesar Act sanctions that were imposed on Syria in 2020. And these are brutal sanctions that were designed to prevent Syria from rebuilding while Assad was still in power. So Assad has been ousted, and now Ahmed al-Shara, the former al-Qaeda commander, is in power. And the U.S. isn't just lifting sanctions, they're also forming a military alliance with him. But the sanctions were particularly bad that were imposed on Syria, so they're going to lift them now once this becomes law. Officially, Trump, I forget exactly the language, but he gave them a waiver from the sanctions for 180 days, and then he renewed it again. But this will officially lift those sanctions. All right, so the next one here, measure to protect Israel from arms restrictions, is tucked into the NDAA. So a new measure to bolster weapons supplies for Israel and protect it from global arms restrictions is tucked into the massive $901 billion 2026 NDAA. So page 1,269 of the roughly 3,000-page document details the new amendment. Essentially, what it does is it requires the U.S. Secretary of War and the Secretary of State and the Director of National Intelligence to assess and review the impact of other countries imposing restrictions on arms exports to Israel. And now, if they find that there are gaps for Israel, that when it comes to their weapon supply, then it requires the U.S. to take action to fill those gaps. And one of those, or mitigate the gaps, is the language that it used. And it says that the U.S. could leverage its industrial base capacity to provide substitute defensive capabilities, essentially saying if there's some kind of military equipment that they get from some country and they can't get it anymore because of the genocide they committed in Gaza, don't worry, the U.S. will swoop in and start providing them with those weapons as well. The reality is, we've seen some restrictions from several countries, including Spain, Slovenia, Canada, Italy, several other countries. But we see, these governments have been under criticism because people have found that the weapon shipments are still happening. They're just limiting some. And the fact is that the U.S. and Germany provide Israel with the vast majority of its weapons. And Germany recently, they said that they were going to stop supplying Israel with weapons that they could use in Gaza, but they've already reversed that. And who knows if they even implemented it in the first place. So these arms embargoes, it's really one country. I mean, Germany can make an impact, but it's obviously the U.S. that has all the power here, that if they wanted to stop Israel, they could, but of course they don't. And here's just another form of support for Israel tucked into this bill. All right, so the next one here, leader of Israeli-backed militia has ISIS ties. So after the killing of Yasser Abu Shabab, the Israeli-backed gang leader in Gaza who led the largest anti-Hamas militia, his deputy, Ghassan al-Duhaini, has taken over as the head of the group, which is officially known as the Popular Forces. So according to Al Jazeera, al-Duhaini's history includes working for the Palestinian Authority and later joining the Army of Islam, or Jaish al-Islam. And don't confuse that. There's a Syria-based group called Jaish al-Islam, but this is a different group based in Gaza, so I'll use the English translation, Army of Islam, for this group. So, and this is a Salafi jihadist group with a similar ideology to Al-Qaeda that declared allegiance to ISIS in 2015. And Israeli media has also reported on al-Duhaini's jihadist past, with the Jerusalem Post saying that he was once a commander in a terrorist group in Gaza that was associated with Al-Qaeda, referring to the Army of Islam. And here's a picture of al-Duhaini with Abu Shabab, obviously before Abu Shabab was killed. So just some things about this group. The Army of Islam, in 2011, the Egyptian government accused them of being responsible for a New Year's Eve bombing of a Coptic Orthodox church in Alexandria, which killed 24 Christians. According to reports at the time, the group denied that it was responsible, but they said that they supported the attack, that they supported the church bombing. Over the years, the Army of Islam has clashed with both Israel killed one of their leaders, and Hamas, which it considers an apostate group. A member of the Army of Islam said in a 2019 interview when asked about Hamas, quote, "The Jaish al-Islam group believes that all who rule by man-made laws are apostate disbelievers. The Hamas government has arrested a number of members of Jaish al-Islam, and that deed has been repeated," end quote. So it's unclear when exactly this guy, al-Duhaini, joined the Army of Islam, exactly how involved he was in the group. But other members of the Popular Forces also have ties to ISIS, including Issam Nabahin, who was actually identified by Egyptian intelligence as a fighter for ISIS in the Sinai Desert and actually fought against Egyptian troops. And also Abu Shabab himself was accused of having ties to ISIS arms smugglers. And I'm not sure about the new guy, al-Duhaini. It's not exactly clear. The reports say that he's been imprisoned in Gaza before. I don't know if he was in prison when this all started, when Israel unleashed its bombing campaign, like Abu Shabab, who he escaped thanks to the Israeli bombing. And then he formed this gang and then got support from Israel, arms from Israel. So now, it's being led here by a guy who was a member of a ISIS group. And this is who Israel is funding and supporting. And this and according to Israeli media reports the U.S. is looking to use these groups against Hamas, and there's been reports of contact between them and Jared Kushner. This seems like this should be bigger news, but doesn't really seem to be getting much attention. Maybe I'll ask the State Department what they think about all this. But so the killing of Abu Shabab, which according to Israeli media, Israeli reports, he was killed it was an internal dispute within his group, and he was killed. IDF rushed him to a hospital, but he died on the way. So this was seen as kind of a blow to Israel's plan to use these groups against Hamas. But this guy, al-Duhani, the new leader, is saying, he's ready to keep fighting Hamas, basically. That's what he told Israeli media. All right, so the next one here, report says that Israel is spying on U.S. troops at Gaza monitoring base. So Israeli operatives are conducting widespread surveillance of U.S. troops and allies at the new U.S. base in southern Israel meant to monitor Gaza. And this was reported by The Guardian on Monday. The report said that the scale of spying was so widespread that the U.S. commander of the base, Lieutenant General Patrick Frank, summoned an Israeli counterpart for a meeting to tell him that recording has to stop. And personnel from other countries at the base have also raised concerns about Israel recording conversations. The Guardian cited sources who had been briefed on disputes about open and covert recording of meetings and discussions at the base. In response to the report, the IDF says that it documents and summarizes meetings in which it is present, but it added that the claim the IDF is gathering intelligence on its partners in meetings which the IDF is an active participant is absurd, but it does seem to be that they're being accused of recording other conversations at the base. And so the U.S. established this base, which is officially known as the Civil Military Coordination Center, or CMCC, to monitor the Gaza ceasefire deal, which, of course, Israel continues to violate by launching regular attacks against Palestinians. Initially, the U.S. sent 200 troops to the base, though this report said that dozens had already left. Israel has also violated the ceasefire deal by continuing to restrict humanitarian aid. And last month, it was reported that this U.S. base would be taking over the role. The language would replace Israel as the overseer of aid entering Gaza. But a U.S. official speaking to The Guardian disputed the idea that the U.S. was now in charge of the deliveries. The official said, quote, "We didn't take over aid. It is an integration. It is hand in glove. They, the Israelis, remain the hand, and the CMMC has become the glove over that hand," end quote. Another interesting detail of this report is that U.S. logistics experts in the U.S. military arrived at the base, and they thought they were going to be looking at ways, logistic problems that they could try to solve to get more aid into Gaza. But they learned that the only real impediment, the biggest impediment to the aid shipments was Israel's restrictions. And apparently, according to this report, several dozen of these logistic experts have left. So, one thing about this base, obviously the U.S. has been a co-belligerent essentially all along in Gaza with all the, not quite belligerent, but you know what I mean, when it comes to all the weapons and other support that they give Israel. But this is just more, putting the U.S. more involved in the actual blockade of Gaza and controlling what goes in and what goes out. And of course, there's no Palestinians at this monitoring center. All right, so the next one here, medicines and medical supplies in Gaza reaching catastrophic levels. This article is from the Palestine Chronicle. So stocks of medicine and medical supplies has reached catastrophic levels, with vital items continuing to run out in various treatment departments, Gaza's health ministry warned on Monday. In a press release, the health ministry said that 52% of essential medicines, 71% of medical supplies, and 70% of laboratory necessities are now completely depleted. So essentially, Israel is still restricting these kinds of shipments into Gaza, medical supplies. And, they classify things as dual use. They restrict things in many different ways from entering Gaza. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu to meet Trump on December 29th. So President Trump will meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the U.S. on December 29th, an Israeli government spokesman announced on Monday. The visit will mark the fifth time this year that Trump will host the Israeli leader, who is wanted by the International Criminal Court for his role in war crimes in Gaza. The previous 4 visits took place at the White House, and Israeli media reports suggest the 5th meeting could happen at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. I mean, this is just is there another world leader who has visited the U.S. president in 1 year? This many times, 5 times. It seems like a high number to me. And apparently, according to the Israeli government, they're going to discuss the Gaza ceasefire, the so-called ceasefire, and the future of the International Stabilization Force, which, again, there's just no progress that this force is being assembled. But just showing this very strong support that Trump has, for Netanyahu, pushing for his pardon and everything, and inviting him to the country this many times. All right, so the next one here, Gvir wears Noose pendant as he pushes death penalty bill. So this article is from Middle East Eye. So Israel's far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir was pictured in Parliament on Monday wearing a Noose pendant on his lapel as he continues to push for Palestinian prisoners to be handed the death penalty. Posting on X, Ben-Gvir boasted about wearing the icon along with other members of his Atzma Yehudit party, which that's the Hebrew term for the party. The English translation is Jewish Power. That's the name of his political party, is the Jewish Power Party. So members of his party were also wearing the Noose lapel, and he's been pushing for the this death penalty. He wrote on X, quote, "I and the members of my Jewish Power faction arrived today at the National Security Committee discussions to continue advancing the death penalty for terrorists while wearing a pin in the shape of a hangman's noose. As a symbol of our commitment to passing the law and as a clear message that terrorists are sons of death. The time has come for the death penalty for terrorists," end quote. And there's been videos of him there's at least one video of him going into a prison with Palestinian prisoners face down on the floor and bound up, and him saying, they need to die. And this is a very influential and senior member of the Israeli government. All right, so the next one here, Israel plans to spend $740 million on propaganda in 2026. So this is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So the Israeli government, their budget proposal includes quadrupling the public diplomacy budget, also known as Hasbara, and the plan calls for increasing it to $729 million in 2026, up from $150 million this year. The significant boost to the public diplomacy fund comes as Israel's image is plummeting in the U.S., and we've seen these polls of, really big changes here when it comes to American public opinion of Israel, including among people on the right in the Republican Party, mainly among younger people, Gen Z and millennials, who just don't want anything to do with this country as they have seen it commit all sorts of crimes over the past 2 years. So they're, another sign of kind of the desperation is increasing the Hasbara budget. And we've seen things inside the U.S., pro-Israel billionaires buying up media companies, TikTok trying to flip the narrative. But I don't think they're going to be able to do it. Kind of in the new media landscape, people are fed up. And it's very obvious, with Barry Weiss at CBS and everything, what they're trying to do. All right, so the next one here, UAE-Backed Militias seize oil facility in Yemen. So this article is from the Cradle. So there's been some fighting in southern and eastern Yemen between the STC, the Southern Transitional Council, which is a separatist group that wants to basically declare independence and secede from the rest of Yemen. And the thing is that Yemen is already is broken up and has been for a long time. The Houthis, or Ansar Allah, control what used to be North Yemen. What was it, in 1990? There was, from 1962 or so to 1990, there was a North and South Yemen, and then they became one country in 1990. The Houthis control what used to be North Yemen for the most part. And then the STC and some other, so the STC is backed by the UAE, and then there's some, I don't even know what the other force is, because the Saudi-backed government that's based in Saudi Arabia, after they gave up on trying to reinstall President Hadi, they created a presidential council, and the STC was brought into the presidential council. So the idea was to unite the anti-Houthi factions. So I don't even know like what kind of force there is in among the Saudi-backed government. So it seems like the STC, and this report says so, has been able to capture this territory very easily, and they're not really facing much of a fight. So again, they've taken some territory in both Eastern and in Aden as well, which is where the Saudi-backed international government and the STC has been based. So they're essentially taking control. And, I wonder what the UAE might be up to here, if they're behind this, because one thing that they've been doing with their activity in Africa, in the Horn of Africa, in Somalia and Puntland, is kind of establishing military bases. And they're the ones who are suspected of being behind construction on islands near Yemen of airstrips and things. They've been making moves like they might be preparing for another war in Yemen, maybe another attempt at going against the Houthis. Doesn't seem like the Saudis really want anything to do with that at the moment, but the UAE might be moving in that direction. I don't think they would be fighting directly, but maybe a push from the STC or something. But at the same time, the STC, they want secession. They don't really want to try to take over the rest of Yemen. So could just be about them consolidating power. All right, so the next one here, I left up the Somalia one from yesterday. So the last story, Zelensky meets with European leaders on peace plan. So this is another one from Kyle. So Zelensky met with the leaders of France, the UK, and Germany in London on Monday, following discussions Zelensky had with Witkoff and Kushner and all these other talks between U.S. and Ukrainian officials about the peace deal. The sign is that Zelensky's still saying he doesn't want to cede any territory. And the Europeans basically back whatever his position is, and they're throwing things out there. I think that they want to intentionally sabotage these talks, talking about sending troops to Ukraine. That's just something Russia's never going to go for. So this meeting, Zelensky probably got some support for his, demands and everything, which just aren't going to lead to a peace deal at this current time. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Ted Snyder, Venezuela and the most blatant coup in history, one from Ron Paul, the Hegseth killings must stop, one from Medea Benjamin and Nicholas J.S. Davies, if Trump is serious about peace, Marco Rubio has to go, one from John Mearsheimer, Europe's bleak future, and our spotlight is from John Seller at the Orange County Register. Again, celebrate 30 years of antiwar.com as the war machine rages on. So again, if you could help us out with an end-of-the-year donation, we'd really appreciate it. Antiwar.com/donate. Write it off your taxes. And celebrate the 30th anniversary of antiwar.com in some way, Post about us or tell your friends about us. But anyway, that's it for me for today. Please like, subscribe, comment, follow us on social media and everything. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.